Gary Gensler, your favorite regulator. Today we're going to be diving into a reaction video, a new kind of series where I'm going to give you my seething reaction to yet again another joke of a video recently released by none other than our friend at the SEC. Now there is never a shortage of reasons to actually be mad at Geeky Gary, but this time I'm especially irritated. So if you're ready to take on Gensler, it's time to discover crypto. First of all, any self-respecting human with even the flimsiest shred of dignity and a poorly developed sense of professional integrity would have admitted competence and resigned their position by now. So the fact that Gary Gensler is still holding his office is proof that he is a subhuman mongrel, at best. But I don't care what your political background is, this guy has made it clear time and time again that he is the ultimate stooge. And that's because he's not even pretending to answer any direct questions from congressmen and senators. He refuses to clarify the most basic facts around policy.
Is ether a commodity or a security?
And again, it depends on the facts and the law, and if there's a group of individuals...
I'm asking you about the facts and the law sitting in your seat and the judgment you are making.
And so, Mr. Chair, I think you would not want me to prejudge because I'm also...
But you have prejudged on this.
In blatantly doing the bidding of whatever globalist Wall Street masters are holding him on his very short leash. If you're an American citizen, I encourage you to call your elected representatives and ask them to demand his resignation. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This is nonpartisan. This is about a dysfunctional government and removing an obstructionist hack. I'm not just saying this out of pure spite, I'm saying it because this guy is almost single-handedly putting our entire country at a risk of missing out on the next century of global finance. That is, at least the retailers. His elitist friends will be fine. Now, memes aside, this is a serious problem. I would say that makes Darth Gensler, the vague, one of the biggest risks to our national security and well-being. So if you're one of the brave in the land of the free, please call your congressman and ask your senator to fire Gary Gensler. Now, I'll leave that link for you in the description below, because seriously, this affects us all. So make sure your voice is heard. But all right, I am sorry, I just had to get that out of my system because it's very much needed. So on November 8th, 2023, Gary Gensler decided to post this 3-minute video on X.
What is the Securities and Exchange Commission's Division of Corporation Finance, and what does it have to do with a basic bargain?
About basic bargains and why the SEC has regulatory oversight over them. This is part of his condescending and ongoing video series, which he calls Office Hours with Gary Gensler. This is, of course, a play on the fact that he used to be an MIT professor, but we'll get back to that later in the video. Because if you recall, back in February, he posted an Office Hours video about crypto staking.
That's S-T-A-K-E, not S-T-E-A-K.
Where he made a joke about how it was different from stake, like a ribeye steak. So that's the level of seriousness one of our nation's top regulators is bringing to the crypto conversation. They're making jokes. And that's sadly what we are up against. So back to the basic bargain video. Gary starts out by saying in the 1920s was a great time for industrialization and mass production in America. Business was booming, but American investors lacked protection by federal law. Gensler says that Americans back in those days were getting, I quote, flim-flam. Never heard of that, but that is apparently people that are taken advantage of by hucksters, fraudsters, scam artists, and Ponzi schemes. Now, I don't know when the last time I heard someone use the word flim-flammed, but like, dude, how is this guy even real? How old is he? Anyways, he goes on to talk about the Truth in Securities Act, or the Securities Act of 1933. This was a law passed by Congress that had two basic objectives. One, required investors receive financial and other significant information, specifically about securities being offered for public sale. And two, prohibit deceit, representations, and other frauds relating to the public sale of securities. Gensler says that the act introduced the idea of a basic bargain. Investors could be able to decide what risk to take with their capital, as long as companies raising capital made complete and truthful disclosures. A year later, Congress created the Securities and Exchange Commission, specifically to oversee regulation and fundamentally protect this idea of the basic bargain. Gensler himself says that the SEC is supposed to be a, quote, merit neutral. In other words, the SEC is not supposed to take a position on whether or not an investor should invest in a given security. They are only supposed to do one thing, and that is to make sure that the investor is not being defrauded when they go to do it. On-chain data is the most complete and truthful disclosure system ever devised on the open market. That's the whole point. The digital asset space was created precisely because we, the people, do not and don't want to have to trust a third party anymore. We don't want to have to rely on central bankers. We don't want to have to deal with corrupted regulators like a Gary Gensler. And we don't want to be scammed by people like Bernie Madoff and SPF. But instead of encouraging the transition from the legacy of placing trust in bad actors to Web3, this absolute faithless shill has done everything he can do to kill crypto. He killed off Kraken's staking business because they couldn't pay to fight him in court. He lost his idiotic lawsuit up against Ripple with XRP. But he's still dragging his heels as hard as possible within the bounds of the law, even to the point where Congress has threatened to subpoena the agency over this. So taking it back to the objective of protecting the basic bargain, how is hamstringing the digital assets industry going to protect investors? Instead of protecting this basic bargain and helping to facilitate capital formation for projects in the digital asset industry, glizzy guzzler Gary Gensler has taken upon himself to shut it down. And he has interfered with investor activity in digital assets in every possible manner available to him. He rejected Bitcoin spot ETFs, so much so that a federal judge, Naomi Real, might have butchered that name, but called the SEC's decision arbitrary and capricious. Because the SEC couldn't explain why they approved a futures Bitcoin product, but not a spot one. It makes no sense. They are nearly completely correlated. Now, Gensler has also flat out refused to answer simple, direct questions from some of our nation's highest ranking elected officials. Basic questions like, is Ethereum a security? And is a tokenized Pokemon card a security? Chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Congressman Patrick McHenry, tried for 4 minutes to get an answer on Ether out of Gary, and instead just got Gary to yap along. Congressman Richie Torres of New York tried to get Gary to tell him if buying a tokenized Pokemon card was a security, and also got stonewalled by an incompetent chairman of the SEC. He just walked around the question. While he was a professor at MIT, Gary Gensler himself said that Bitcoin and Ethereum were not securities. However, now that he is in office, he can't bring himself to say this. He is also known for shilling Algorand to his students and bragged about being colleagues with Silvo McCauley, Algorand's founder and another professor at MIT. But again, now that he's in office, suddenly Algorand is being treated like a security. The list of Gary's evils and woes goes on, and in 2019, he offered to serve as an advisor to Binance. Yes, Binance, which is really classy. Going from begging CZ for a job to trying to kill the whole crypto industry definitely goes to show that he is not a neutral regulator. He's out for blood. The ultimate BS from Gary and the SEC, though, in my opinion, has to be Prometheum. What you haven't heard of is something that suddenly, out of nowhere, a crypto exchange no one had ever heard of that doesn't offer any trading for any digital assets except Bitcoin, received a special purpose broker dealer approval from the SEC themselves. And then Gary came out and was like, see? There is a clear path to regulatory approval for crypto exchanges in the United States. The whole thing was and is a total farce. It was a scam cooked up by the SEC to make it look like they were working with a crypto project and exchanges. But in reality, they had no intention of doing so, and still don't. Now, I'm not an expert, but this is what some people might call the ultimate flim-flam. Or at least Gary, because seriously, I've never heard anybody else say that. But finally, Representative and senior congressional leader Tom Emmer of Minnesota has had enough. On November 8th, the same day that Gary released his hypocritical basic bargain video, Tom Emmer went on the House floor and took action. Called him this, as effective as he is incompetent. He then went on to introduce an amendment to an appropriations bill that was designed to put a stop to the SEC's ongoing abuse of the digital asset industry. The bill passed the House with no opposition. And the amendment prohibits the SEC from using taxpayer-funded resources to pursue enforcement action against the digital asset industry until Congress passes legislation that authorizes regulatory enforcement, specifically within their jurisdiction. Simple, clear, and rational. Basically, what Representative Emmer is saying is that until Congress passes legislation on the digital asset industry, the SEC can't go around suing people for breaking laws that don't exist. This brings me back to where we started, which is another call to action. Call your representatives. Most importantly, call your senators, because they actually do and will listen. Because when this amendment comes up in the Senate, if it doesn't pass, the unanimous approval of the House won't matter. Which means if you're tired of Gary Gensler abusing his power, if you're tired of the Wall Street tycoons installing their cronies into positions of power to do their bidding, and if you're tired of your government trying to kill our industry, stand up and stop being bullied and pushed around. Pick up that phone, send an email. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, do it. Because we need to tell the Senate that this amendment needs to be passed. Because after all, the United States of America is still the land of the free and the home of the brave. And we need to make sure that Gary Gensler understands that. That's all I got for this one, guys. So smash that like button, turn on those notifications, because we're gonna be pursuing not only this from a nonpartisan manner, but we're gonna be making change in Web3 policy come 2024.